that basically are the various steps involved in defining a Kanban flow in an organization. As I mentioned in the beginning, you don't have to basically introduce a new process. Whatever process that you are following, you need to basically understand the value stream maps, and you can overlay the Kanban visual dashboard on top of it so that you will be able to understand the bottlenecks and remove it so that your flow is smooth. Most of the organization have their own different classes of service. You can start by using the same classes of service, and as you learn more, you will be able to kind of optimize and incrementally change it. Now we understand how you can implement Kanban. The question is, where is it suited? What are the ideal scenarios where Kanban might be the right methodology? We already know that there are enough software development methodology. You have Scrum, you have extreme programming. So when would be an ideal fit for Kanban? So one of the areas which would be an ideally suitable for Kanban would be the event-driven development. I don't really remember where I got the term event-driven development, but event-driven development are developmental activities which is triggered as a result of an event occurring. Let's look at some of the scenarios where which kind of fits into this scenario. One is the help desk and the support activities. One of the users is trying to use your application online, and he or she is not able to make the payment. He gives you a call to your help desk. That is an event which triggers an action from your end. A very similar kind of activities you can see in application support and maintenance project. If you are doing sustainable engineering, you might have applications which are there in the production and actively used by users. Now one of the challenges in these scenarios are, if you are following a development methodology like Scrum, you might have like planned 5 or 6 enhancement requests or 2 to 3 bugs as a part of the delivery commitment for a sprint. Now what usually happens is, at the beginning of the sprint, the team spend time to do the sprint planning, understand the size of each of the stories, and commit what they can deliver at the end of the sprint. But as the sprint progresses, by day 2 or by day 3, excuse me, there is an event that might be triggered in the production. Could be a production issue which might be of critical in nature, which basically requires the team to halt what they are doing and focus on that issue. So all the effort that the team does in terms of the sprint planning becomes a waste. At least some part of it becomes a waste. And what the team basically committed to deliver at the end of the sprint, it also goes for a toss. And if this becomes a continuous scenario, it also starts impacting morale of the team. The team will start questioning the logic of creating a sprint planning and the value you are getting by actually spending the time in doing your estimations. This is another scenario where the events that's triggered outside your scope decides and changes your priority pretty dynamically. The third scenario where this basically applies is if you are developing a software which is driven by the market, especially if you are a lean startup and you are building a product and you are looking at the market to tell you what are the features that needs to be there in the product. It doesn't make sense for you to spend a lot of time to define all the features that's needed in your product. It also doesn't really make sense for you to kind of wait for a sprint to get the feedback from your customers. Let me give you one specific example. Let's assume that you are developing a product and you try to understand what is the value you are going to get by using a login mechanism provided by like a Google or a Facebook IDs. So you wanted to know whether your software should have the capability where the users can log in using Facebook or a Google ID or a Twitter ID. Now, how to know whether there is a value in introducing that feature into your software development? You can basically follow two approaches. One, where you build the entire functionality at the end of your sprint, which is if it is for a 1 month, at the end of the month you deliver that into the market, and then you might realize that your users are not comfortable to share their Facebook ID or a Google ID, and they prefer the old way of logging in through a user ID and password. Now the other approach is you can basically introduce a small version of that where you will allow the users to basically log in through one of their IDs and see what is the kind of adoption that that feature has in the customers, and then introduce the capability with more login mechanisms using IDs like a Facebook or a Twitter. Now the constraints with the second approach, if you are following a Scrum, is you need to wait for the first sprint to over for the users to get the login using the Google ID, wait for the feedback from the customer, so your sprint 2 is also gone, and based on that feedback the feature is going to come and be available to the users only at the end of a sprint 3. That's basically 3 months for you if your sprint length is 1 month, and if you're working on a product, especially in a competitive market, that's a lot of time you are giving to your competitors. So in this scenario, Kanban might be a more appropriate tool where you will be able to consistently look at the priorities and pick up the features based on what is your work in progress limit, so that your focus is to bring the feature in the shortest cycle time to your users, get the feedback from the market, and then decide what is the next feature that you want to pick up. So in all these three scenarios, the sum of the common characteristics that you could see is the nature of the demand. In all these three, it is pretty difficult for you to determine clearly what is going to be the demand. In the case of an application support and maintenance, if you pick up 2 features and start working on it, there might be a production issue that come later, which basically will get a higher priority compared to what is already there in your bucket. So demand is always determined by the events that's happening outside your control. So in those scenarios, excuse me, it makes more sense to focus on limiting your work in progress limit, which will help you to enable a flow so that your work items reaches customers faster, and thereby you will be able to introduce a predictive delivery mechanism into your system. So instead of, so if you are providing a support to an existing application, instead of focusing on working on fixing all the bugs, you can basically set a class level agreement that every week you will basically provide closure of 2 to 3 major issues, 2 minor issues, and 3 or more critical issues. What those issues can be determined by your Kanban board and the priority in which it comes into your Kanban board. So the team always pick up the top priority which is there in the Kanban board in your start state, and it flows from there. So the customers always get the maximum value. At the same time, you are not really, your team is not really pushed to the wall by the consistent change in the requirements. So we already talked about one of the advantages of the Kanban. That's from a customer's perspective, where the biggest value for a customer is his or her ability to get the value in the shortest period of time.